Man, you think that Dunkin' Donuts sandwich was good? I'll tell you what. Welcome back to the garage. Friday morning, 19th of October, about 8:15 in the morning. Played hooky from work today, so I'm here until mid-afternoon or so. My next stage of painting is going to be to get 2K primer on the door here. So I'm going to, within my 7-day window on the epoxy that I went into and talked about in the last video. I do have some minor fish-eyeing, if you can see that in the light, I'm not sure, right in here. So I may take the red scuff pad or some high grit sandpaper to that and see if I can smooth that out a little bit. But I expect this high build stuff to kind of hook me up there. And then in between coats, I'll be hitting on and concentrating on the boot lid. So that's the plan for today. Oh my God, that's so good. So environmental conditions in the garage are obviously important, or whatever you're going to do for your paint. And I've pointed this out before, but I picked up this thermometer and hygrometer or humidity monitor from Amazon. It was like 10 bucks. It was very cheap. One nice thing about this thing is it'll give you an all-time or a little high, it'll give you a high and low data on both humidity and temperature, either all-time since the batteries have been changed or you reset it, or in the last 24 hours, which is pretty convenient when I'm not here and don't know what the conditions are in the garage. To go along with that, you need one of these little cheapo infrared thermometer things. I think this was like 10 bucks from my favorite Harbor Freight with a coupon. So I came over to the garage last night on my way home from work, turned the heat on because it was supposed to get down to freezing or around freezing. So I took the infrared thermometer, I shot the paint cans to make sure. This is the 2K primer that I got. The gallon of the 2K on the left there in the activator. It's a 4-to-1 ratio. But anyway, I hit the cans and the door with the infrared thermometer and looked at the history of the temperature. 65 degrees is kind of the magic number, and I'm about 66 was the lowest temperature I found on the bottom of the door panel. I expect being here that'll slowly warm up since I'm going to be in here today, but 65 degrees or so in the last 24 hours is what you want based on the history of the temperature in the garage. Based off my thermometer, I think I'm going to be good to go. So I am going to go ahead and be safe to paint. All right, another thing with this 2K primer, I bought regular build primer. You can also get a high build primer. I spoke with the guys at SPI, and the recommendation from the help desk was essentially just get the standard 2K primer. The cost price of this per unit volume is cheaper than the high build stuff because it's got less solids in it, and you sand most of this stuff off anyway. And based on what I was looking at and what I told the guy about what I was doing and everything, he said he just recommended a gallon of the high build. The point is you're going to sand most of this stuff off anyway and to get the panel flat, so that was their recommendation. So we'll see how it goes. So it's again a 4-to-1 ratio, so that's what I'm going to be mixing up. It's significantly thicker, or it's supposed to be significantly thicker than the epoxy primer. So to do that, or to account for that, the instruction manual calls you for a 1.8 to a 2.5 millimeter tip. So I only have, the largest tip I have that came with the gun kit was a 1.8 millimeter tip. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. We'll see how it flows and whether or not I think I need something bigger. I can pick up bigger tips pretty easily. Amazon has them. I'll look around other places to see if I can find them a little cheaper because they're about 55 bucks for a new tip. But anyway, to get the tip off, this is the portion that you're going to change out here, if you can see that. So I just get a 1/2 inch wrench. It's keyed on here with just a regular, bolt type of thing there. Just loosen that guy up. It spins right out. And on the side of the tips, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that or not. On this flat is the information about the tip itself, the tip size, and at the back it says 1/8. So that's the 1.8 millimeter tip. So just screw that guy back on. All right, and snug it down a little bit. I don't go real tight with this because there's no reason to. The needle that's in here and everything doesn't need to get swapped out for these tips, as far as I know. No matter what size tip you get for this particular gun, as long as it fits this gun, you don't ever have to change out the tips. or excuse me, the needle or the caps. All right, so now I got that 1.8 millimeter in there, and I'm ready to continue on to the next step. So here's the door with just the epoxy primer on it. I haven't done anything to it yet, and if you can see, it looks like a kind of a crater there. So that's the difference in thickness between where I went down to practically bare metal, I think, which would be like the lower spot, and the epoxy primer thickness. So hopefully that's what this primer is going to do, is bring all those surfaces up and level them out and fill in the really, really light stuff that the epoxy is not thick enough to fill, but the build primer is. So when I run my hands over this, it does feel really good. It feels pretty flat. There's no spaces or spots in here that I think that I need to revisit with any filler or anything, so that's a good thing because I'd be upset. But otherwise, there's a lot of those little splotches and everything all over the door, and then I do have that little bit of minor fisheyeing to worry about, so I'm going to try to sand a little bit of that out just to scuff it up, but then I'll be mixing up paint and getting ready to put 2 to 3 coats of the primer on here and then letting it sit and then going to town. Door scuffed up. Again, I want to make the point that I did not have to do this because I still am in my 7-day window for the epoxy. You do not have to scuff it up before applying something, but I did just want to show you that you can see it's all modeled looking. Again, the highs and the lows coming out. So, but I can feel very little waviness or anything in the panel. Again, my big point here was to try to get some of these fish eyes out, which I think I've done good enough. It feels a little bit like snake skin, but I'm going to get the primer on there, the build primer on there, and see how this stuff works out. Give it a shot, kind of guinea pig it with this door. So I hit the door with wax and grease remover once just to get the major dust off from the sanding job. I'll hit it again here before I'm ready to paint. I think I had mentioned a time or two ago that I had problems with the door and the boot lid, a couple of these pieces kind of moving around a little bit on me from the pressure of the air coming out of the gun. So what I did was essentially put an anchor on it. So I just took a piece of shot line, thread it to the bottom hole, one of the holes in the door, put a knot on it so it wouldn't pull through. Hopefully that'll keep the door at least somewhat stable, kind of anchored up a little bit. And I kind of pulled it out to try to straighten the door up a little bit so I wasn't as much of an angle to get the bottom down there. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so it's time to get looking at mixing up some paint. So this stuff has a much shorter pot life than the epoxy primer does. So I'm looking at a 30 to 45 minute pot life according to the instruction manual at 75 degrees. It's colder than that in here, but not much, so I expect, you know, maybe a little bit longer than 45 minutes, but I'm not going to bet on any of that. Only mix as much as you need, in other words, because you're going to waste what you don't. So because I got this big huge gallon here, which I still need to mix, and then the activator will be pretty easy, but I want to get this big huge gallon in these little cups. It's a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to go to the 2 here and the 2 on the other one. That'll give me the 4-to-1 for the 2 parts. And looking across, that looks like I'm going to have about 4 ounces of paint. Based on what I was getting with the epoxy, it's about the same. I'm going to try to push 3 coats out of that. I might not make that. I need to get at least 2 on there. I expect 2 or 3 processes of this. So, you know, I'm not too concerned about getting 3 coats the first time around. I can kind of judge my amount here. It's going to go on a little thicker, whether or not that I'm going to go through the paint a little faster. I assume that I am. The other important thing here is to let it flash in between coats. The instruction manual kind of makes a pretty big deal out of this and letting this stuff flash off. And you're looking at about a 3 to 5 minute flash time. So I'll go with the 5 minutes for that. In the interim, since I'll have the paint in the gun, I won't really have enough time to dump the primer if I have any excess in the can. I won't have enough time to dump it out, clean the gun real quick, and spray it back on before I'm ready to put on the second coat. So essentially what I'm going to do is just kind of keep the gun wet. And as I am, you know, when I'm waiting for that 5 minutes in between coats, I'm just going to spray the gun every once in a while so that the primer doesn't start to cure up inside the paint gun. Hopefully that'll work. That's I'm kind of giving that a shot. But once I get it on, I'll have about 30 to 60 minutes to wait before I get to the point where she's ready to sand. So now I got this big huge gallon. It's been sitting here for a little while. Obviously it's sitting on my shelf since I bought it in May time frame. And I got the activator. I'll just mix that, give that a shake or two. But I'm going to stir the paint up and then get it to where I'm close to getting the pour in. I got these little like medicine cups here that I used when I did the U-Paul Raptor liner for the red. I'll just pour that into there and get that for the getting it in the cup. Ooh, this stuff is thick. See that big bulb on there? It's also pretty fragrant. I'm going to put my mask on. Alright, so after thinking about it a little more, I think I am going to go to the 3 line on the 4-to-1. It does spray a little thicker. It's thicker than I thought it would be. Granted, it'll thin up with the activator, but I do have a gallon of this stuff. I don't think I'm going to go through the whole gallon on the car, but who knows, I might. But I'd rather, have to buy extra than to, this will go, I'd rather go a little bit more than go short and get caught. Alright, so that's up to the 3 line. Bring this part up to the 3 line. Now again, I'm ready to paint. Once I get with the exception of the gun setup, I'm essentially ready to paint. No induction time or anything like that for this stuff, unlike the epoxy. They do stress in the manual to mix this very good for 1 full minute, it says. Alright, strain it in. Time to go. Mark the time, 9:46. Alright, wish me luck. Able to get 4 coats on. The stuff definitely goes on thicker. I think I'm going to invest in a larger spray tip than the 1.8 and go to a 2.2, which is kind of right down the middle. It just didn't seem to flow very well. But it's definitely like spraying, maybe like a latex paint or something like that. That's the consistency of that. But went on pretty even. It looks like grainy almost, so hopefully that's okay, and that's what you're kind of supposed to see. Definitely not as shiny or as pretty as the epoxy, not that I necessarily thought it would be. Definitely a dull look to it. So now I've got it between 30 and 60 minutes is what the book says to allow it to wait before you sand it, so I'm going to let it go the full hour. And in the interim, probably grab a bite to eat for lunch and start working on the boot lid. I want to get some more Heimer and dolly work on that before I get that back into epoxy. If I get lucky, I might get that far today, but I doubt it. We'll see. And I did end up mixing way too much paint. I probably only used about half of what I had mixed up here, so just as a data point there, I can probably safely go to mix out 2 instead of 3 there and still have more than enough. Still waiting for the door to dry. Back on the boot lid, trying to get this guy cleaned up. Got a couple instances of oil canning right there on that guy. So this high spot right here, I'll try to shrink this up with the shrink disc, and then kind of in this area right here. So I'm going to associate it with this high spot, even though it's more over this way, kind of in between those two. That's a low spot there. I don't intend on shrinking that. So I'll hit this one, maybe hit this one lightly, and see if I can get those taken care of. The rest of these high spots for now are not really high, so I'm not gonna hit them. So I'm gonna try to take care of the oil canning just the same way that I try to take care of it on the bonnet. So there's the door after 4 coats of 2K build primer. Can't really see anything on it because it's dull, so I can't really tell any highs or lows or anything. Got a little pin spot right here, a couple of those pin spots right here that I might have to do some glazing putty with or something like that. But I'm going to grab a bite to eat real quick and then we'll sand it up. So I'm at this point, I'm not going to do poly primer if I can help it. So I'm at this blocking point here, so 100 through 320 in a red pad, and then do that as necessary to get a nice flat surface. So that's next. All right, I don't have any 100 grit sandpaper, and I also didn't order any 320 grit sandpaper. A little upset with myself there, but I got 120 grit on a sanding block. I started sanding down here so far. You can see this light color here, so that's a little bit of a high spot where the epoxy is probably coming through, but otherwise it feels pretty good and it sands pretty well. I'm going to hit the rest of this with the 120, and then the 150, 220, and then unfortunately, like I said, I don't have the 320, so just going on and sanding, seeing what I'm getting for high spots and low spots, and then I'm going to use that powder the guide code stuff and see what I got. I'm also pretty concerned about getting through to bare metal. I really don't want to do that because the high build, it says, or the build primer, you shouldn't really be putting that on bare metal. So if I sneak through, I'm going to be looking at having to hit with epoxy again, and I'm beyond that point now on this thing, and I don't really want to do that. So being very careful around the corners, making sure I don't round the block around the corner and take that down to bare metal. And then I have a feeling too that having the short sanding block like this also lends itself to gouging it a little bit. So when I order sandpaper, I think I'm going to order another couple sanding blocks. All right, so that's 120. I'll go hit it with 150 now, and then we'll do some guide code and see what it looks like. Again, you may notice that I seem to be going at an angle this time and kind of cross-hatching it a little bit. A little bit different of a block sanding method with this stuff. This stuff sands really nice. Flip this around. Not getting to all this spot here, right on the window seam. I can see some lighter gray areas, and the lighter gray areas would be the epoxy, and they would show up as high spots. So I've got my guide code stuff now that I showed you in the past. This is a much rougher paint than the epoxy is, or that bare metal is, definitely. So I'm going to be able to put this guide code on here now, and we'll see if it works. Alright, so we got the guide code on. You can see it's like a dark gray now. So now what I'll do, I'm moving up to 220. I'll start sanding down to 220 where the guide code stays. It's a low spot. Where the guide code goes, it's a high spot. And hopefully, I think the ultimate goal anyway is to get rid of all the guide code, and then you know you've got a pretty flat panel. So we'll see, see how that goes. Alright, so frankly it seems to be working a little too well. I'm taking all the guide code off, so I'm not so sure that I'm using it right. This crease is still not great. I can feel some unsanded spots right there. Let me take the camera here. You might be able to see there where that darker is. I can feel that. And it's rough there where the sandpaper hasn't touched. But I'm not going to concern myself with that little spot. Everything else feels pretty good. This crease is definitely a dangerous point for going down to bare metal. And I don't think I did it anywhere, but there's definitely a couple places that I'm pretty close. But it feels pretty good. Again, because I don't have the 320, I can't go another step here. But I don't think that means that I can't put another couple coats of stuff on here of the primer. So right now what I'm going to do is work on the boot lid. I got a pretty nasty spot on there. I'll show you that here in a bit, where I think I might have messed up trying to shrink something out. And I'm going to leave the door as it is for now. I would like to get epoxy back on the boot lid, and then another couple coats on the door here of the build primer. But I need to do a little bit more research
on making sure that I'm actually approaching this properly and that I'm using the build primer for what it's supposed to be used for. So I'll be back. So I have this spot over here, which I had showed you a little bit ago, had oil canning, and I did something wrong. Made it worse, so it's pretty bad now. And also, is when I was hammering and dolling it, I put a ridge in it that feels like the Andes Mountains right now. That's absolutely horrible in here. But I got body filler and paint, so I'm going to take all that back off and kind of restart myself on this side over here, and go from there. So all I did now is take the stripper disc and take this off, this block of paint, and it's already changed the dynamic a little bit. Anytime you put just even a little bit of heat into these, it's pretty wild. Big old huge spot in here, so too much metal. So what it's causing is causing it to bubble up, and that's causing the oil can. Well, I don't want that. So what I'll do is I'll hit the high sides with the shrinking disc and the water and all that kind of stuff. Now that I've got a lot of the paint and everything off, doing it the proper way, I'll get a lot more heat imparted into the panel. I'm going to take some sandpaper here and scuff up the high spots and then see what I got. Alright, so I've got high spot here, big old low spot in the middle of that. So I might try to put the dolly in here, but not until after I try some shrinking. I even got a couple creases in here where I don't know what I did. I think I might have nailed the corner of a dolly or something, but I didn't do, kind of messed her up a bit. Alright, I'm just working my way in. This one came out really well. That was a good high spot. That just took care of that completely. Still got some high spot right there. I'm going to nail that again. You can probably see the metal flex and bounce up and down on that one. Not as sharp of a sound, so I'm starting to work it out a little bit. Come up here and work my way down. I'm going to hit it with some sandpaper again and get the high spots back up. Alright, looking at this kind of half circle here, or full circle around in this area, big old low spot right in there. Come up on the top here, gets really bad right in here, that's the big spots. Might just touch these up here real quick. Alright, again, this in here and in here. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. Sorry if this has kind of been worthless for the last couple of minutes. Alright, in here and in here. Alright, you probably saw that where it popped. Alright, still got high spots over here. But the oil can's just about gone now. Alright, so about 1 o'clock, and you can see how I kind of have continued to grind the paint away, chasing this oil canning, but I think I've got it to a relatively good spot. Got to remember also that there's the support tubes underneath of this thing, but essentially no oil canning in here, and then it's more of a generalized kind of thing in here, but it doesn't really pop and it rebounds. It doesn't stay. So there's a pretty good pop right there, but it rebounds. So I'm afraid that if I just keep shrinking and stretching or shrinking and chasing, and I'm just going to essentially run this thing all over this boot lid until I've got little marks all over the place and nothing really matters anymore. Anyway, I'm going to be done with playing and chasing it around. I'm going to get it prepped for paint and get a couple coats of epoxy on it. Alright, 2 wet coats of epoxy primer on the boot lid, and still a lot of remnants of body filler and everything, and definitely is going to need some more work, but I wanted to get epoxy on it, and then tomorrow I'll nail it with some more body filler, maybe some hammer and dolly work, and we'll keep going with that. This little anchor thing seemed to work out pretty well for me, so that'll be something I use in the future. Door sitting over there ready for more build primer, and I think another shot of 3 coats or so will probably do the door. and call that that one essentially done. And we'll be back tomorrow to continue on. All right, welcome back. Saturday morning, about 8:30. Going to got some 320 grit sandpaper, just a non-sticky type. Just going to kind of hold that to a sanding block and hit this door with 320 real quick, and then get a couple more coats of the build primer on here. For the little pinhole, if you can see that guy right there, that little pinhole, I got another kind of little mark over here. I'm just going to take a toothpick when I get the paint mixed up, after I shoot it and get the paint mixed up, and I'm just going to kind of fill that hole in with a toothpick and almost put like a little dab of paint there, and then sand it down. Another thing I wanted to show you, you can kind of see this, there's a light spot right here. There's a darker spot right here. A couple of these, not too many. And what those are low spots that the filler has not filled in, and the primer has not filled in. So I'm hoping, and it's pretty, like I can't really feel it with my hand except for the roughness of the paint there where the sandpaper didn't touch it. So I'm hoping that the build primer will build that up enough on these next couple coats. But if not, I think I'm just going to go with it. So hopefully this get two or three more coats of the build primer on here, not mixing anywhere near as much this time. Get a couple more coats on here, get this sanded down today, and call this door done and ready for a final seal coat and color, but not for a while yet. And otherwise I'm going to move on to the boot lid after that, some more hammer and dolly work, and try to correct some of the mistakes I made yesterday. Still dealing with the back of the door here. I've been using hammer and dolly, the shrink disc on all these little high spots and stuff to try to bring it in. It's better than it was before I started, but it's still pretty wavy back here. There is rib supports underneath, which I painted a while ago. I'm going to put that back in. Obviously it'll be in my way to do some hammer and dolly work, but I'm going to put that back in and see what that does. But I'm afraid if I go too far with this and start chasing it around, then I get those reinforcement bars in here, and now I've got another problem. So like I said, I'm going to get some paint on the door and then come back to visit this. Got that bracket support in. It's not tightened down all the way, but even if I press it down, there's sunlight everywhere, so I don't believe that this is going to interfere drastically, at least with me, in being able to mess up or not mess up the curvature of the boot lid. So in other words, I'm not worried about it being there or not being there while I do the work. So I'm going to pull it back out and continue on. Probably a little bit more hammer and dolly work on this, and then get some filler on there. Well, it's better. It ain't great, but it's better. Very wavy, and I'm going to try to take advantage of the filler and use it what it's for. So I'm going to put a lot in there. Got a low spot right here that I got to fill. I can't get behind that at all, so that's going to be pure filler. There's a low spot around the lock that I'll fill. And then this whole area in here across this bend, especially in the center here, I'll fill that. So I'm going to apply the body filler now, and then while that's curing up, I'll go back to the door and do some sanding on that. All right, got that set of filler on. I didn't mix quite enough up, so I got the back here and a little bit on the front lid, but I still have to do the this portion here. So I'm going to let this cure up. I'll get to sanding on that, and then I'll do another round. I don't want to do in-betweens here, and I'll get the door out here real quick and start sanding on that. With the exception of some final prep for the epoxy sealer, which I'm going to try to take to like a 600 grit wet sand, I'm calling this door done. So unfortunately I did come through some bare metal spots, and that's not a good thing, but all the metal spots are on the lower portion of the door, so at least that's, you know, someplace you're not going to see as well. There are some subtle depressions in here. It's definitely not perfect, but it's pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned. So I'll file this guy away. Hopefully I've learned enough from this experience to speed up the following experiences, but I've been working on this thing for a month and a half or something crazy. I'll never get the car done at this rate, but you know, it's what I would call fun, but it definitely made a difference. So I'll pull the boot lid out here and get sanded on that. Most of the body filler is on the boot lid, coming out a little bit better than I thought it would. You can see the marks, I think, in this one. This still needs to get hit. Just another little layer. Got some good high spots here. Some good high spots here. I might try to take either the shrinking disc or a hammer to that. That feels like it might come out a little bit. This high spot here is not too bad. And then I missed a spot here that should have gotten body filler. So I need at least another coat, but I'm going to call it a little bit early today. Head home and do some stuff around the house. But anyway, so that's it for this week, and I'll be over sometime during the week. If you happen to notice, I broke 1,000 subscribers several days ago, so I want to thank everybody for watching the videos and sharing them and getting my subscriber count up above 1,000. As a matter of fact, one of my viewers, Johnny Cool, I think, said he signed in under his wife's account and plussed me up to get me above 1,000. So thanks a lot for that. That was pretty funny. Cracked me up. But anyway, have a good rest of your weekend. That's it for me. We'll see you next week. Cheers.